Well, hey, there's a new season upon us. School is about to start. Things are about to get crazy. I know that all the students are like stoked about school starting back, right? Yeah. I know a few parents are excited about school starting back, like some structure back into our lives. I'm sure that like a week into all that structure, I'm going to be like, we want less structure in our lives. It's just how it goes, right? But it's not just about school starting up, because football's going to be starting up soon, right? Football's going to be starting up, and one of the things that I think about when I think about football starting up this time of year is those license plates or flags or doormats, that's like a house divided, where there's like people from different fan bases who are having to live under the same roof. And I put this up here because I just wanted to, make sure everyone, agreed with me that the only really good place for the logos of Ohio State and Michigan is on a doormat where you would like wipe your feet, right? Am I right? Am I right? Yeah? Well, when I was growing up, I've got a younger brother. He's 4 years younger than I am. And when we were young, our next door neighbors, they still live next door to my parents. They were huge Alabama fans. And one week, my dad was on a business trip. He was away. And while he was gone, our next door neighbors taught my little brother, this precious, innocent little child, this impressionable little one, how to say "Roll Tide." And so when my dad came home from his business trip, my brother greeted him with "Roll Tide." And my dad, was like, who's teaching this child cuss words? Like it might as well be a curse in this home. It's like, let's wash him out. Wash his mouth out with soap right now. Get a rag. It's like that was what we were thinking. But because of all of the praise and the affirmation that my little brother received from our next door neighbors, he was like loving it. He's roll tiding all over the place. And like he actually became an Alabama fan. And we grew up as a house divided for a long time until finally all of our prayers were heard. And he saw the light and he came home. And he is now a Tennessee Volunteer fan. And he lives in Knoxville like a stone's throw from Neyland Stadium. And all is well. But we need to pray for families who are divided along some of these lines. They're going to feel that tearing and that turmoil and that tension this fall. I know that there are some other things that are going to threaten to divide us this fall, like ice cream. That's what you thought I was going to say, right? You were all braced. Like the tension in the room was like, he's going to talk about politics. No, I'm going to talk about the ice cream show. I'm going to talk about Clumpies. I'm going to talk about something that really divides families. I actually know there's a family in this church that is divided here in this, okay? Are you an ice cream show person or are you a Clumpy show? Can I get a raise of hand? Who's a Clumpies? Who's Clumpies? Team Clumpies, okay. Who's team ice cream show? Okay. Nobody, one person. Thank you, Skip. Is there any ice cream showers over here? I was just curious. Okay, and then whose team? I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm just curious. Okay, who's like lactose intolerant team? Yeah, let's go there. Yeah. You should get out and you should go downtown and you should try these ice creams and then decide for yourself which team you're going to be on. These things have a tendency to divide us. I don't know if it was Abraham Lincoln or Jesus who said, "A house divided cannot stand." That was really funny in first service too, and I was not anticipating that. I don't know. I think they both said it. I know Jesus said it. A house divided cannot stand. But what about a heart divided? What about a heart divided? This week in my time with the Lord, I've been walking through the Psalms, and I was reading Psalm 86, and in that psalm, in verse 11, David prays, "Teach me your way, O Lord, that I may walk in your truth. Give me an undivided heart, that I may fear your name." An undivided heart. That really resonated with me, in particular this week. I wonder if you've ever felt like your heart was divided. A few years ago, a good friend of mine sensed that the Lord was giving him a word for the upcoming year. I don't know if any of you are like that. Perhaps you kind of have a word right around New Year's. It sort of is going to be your sort of guiding light, into the year. Maybe you pray for something like that. This friend had a word for the year. It was wholehearted. wholehearted. And he was telling me about this, that he was sensing that the Lord was inviting him to be all in right where he was. To be fully committed, to be fully present, to not be guarded in any way, to not be hesitant in any way or reserved in any way. And I remember following up with him late in the year. It was in December, and I was like, how has that been this year? And he said, this year, I have laughed big. I have cried hard. I have grieved fully. I've rejoiced unashamedly. I've thanked often. I've cheered loudly. I've tried to live wholehearted. No half-hearted measures, or at least there were less of them. And that resonated so deeply in me. Lord, give me an undivided heart. I love that prayer. Because so much is flying at us, right? I feel pulled in so many different directions. I've got so much information flying at me. I've got so many expectations. I've got so many things fighting for my attention and my affection and telling me they're going to satisfy me. Lord, give me an undivided heart. The Lord gives us a promise in Jeremiah 29. It says, you will seek me and you will find me when you seek me with what? All your heart. All your heart. An undivided heart. And we need the Lord to give us that undivided heart. And I wonder if that just might be right where you are today. Feeling that pull. Feeling that heart divided. That house divided. So much competing for your affection and your attention, your devotion, your allegiance. You could probably stop right there. This is going to become more relevant as we wrap up the book of Joshua this morning. We've been walking through Joshua all summer long, and today in chapter 24, the people have all been gathered, and they're at a really significant place. We're going to talk about that. The Lord's going to speak to them as he often does in very specific and significant places. And then they're going to have to make a choice. And it's a choice that you and I have to make as well. So before we get there, let's do one last review of the book of Joshua. We've said that Joshua is about God's people receiving God's promised land, and that in many ways it parallels our receiving God's promised life. We talked about how just as Joshua led the people of God into the promised land, now Jesus leads us into the promised life, both now and for eternity. We saw how in chapters 1 through 4, the people were entering the promised land. They entered the promised land, and we talked about that great charge to be strong and courageous. We talked about the importance of the people not turning from the left or the right from the word of God, but to trust him and obey him. And then they put that into practice when they had to step into the Jordan River at flood stage while it was still flowing before God would part the waters so that they could cross the river into Canaan, into the land he had promised them. Chapters 5 through 12 are all about conquering the promised land. We saw that the enemies of God's people were defeated as God's people trusted him and obeyed him and followed his direction. Chapters 13 through 21 was all about inheriting the promised land. The land was distributed to all the tribes of Israel, and then God gave them rest from their enemies. And as Isaac shared with us last week, Joshua reminded the people in chapter 21, not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass. Not one word of all of God's good promises failed. They all came to pass. And now as we come to the final chapter, Joshua has gathered everyone for one final assembly. He's going to make one final speech in which he challenges them to wholehearted devotion to God. Joshua 24, verse 1. Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem, which is just so fun to say. You should try it. Everybody say Shechem. Shechem. Just feel free. At any time I say it, just repeat it, okay? We'll see how that goes. Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem. Thank you. Thank you. And he summoned the elders, the heads of the judges, and the officers of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. Shechem was such a significant place in the story of God's people. But in order to really understand it, you got to get in the time machine. You got to get in the DeLorean. We've had a lot of 80s references throughout this series. And we got to go back about 700 years, all the way back to Genesis chapter 12, because that's when God first promised this land to Abraham. It's where one of Abraham's descendants, Jacob, would one day settle and build an altar there, and then one day a well there. It's where Jacob would send a son of his named Joseph to go find his brothers, and it's where his brothers would sell him into slavery. In the New Testament, this place goes by a different name, Sychar. Jacob's well is still there, and one day, Jesus, traveling that north-south route between Galilee in the north and Judea in the south, stops at Jacob's well right there at Shechem. Yes. And he has a conversation with a woman, a Samaritan woman. He offers her living water and changes her life. Places can be very powerful. Think about places in your story where something changed, or God spoke. Shechem was that kind of place. I think that'll be the end of it. Verse 2, and Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says the Lord." So now the Lord is going to be speaking over the next several verses, and he's going to lay something out for them, kind of a reminder of his grace to them, so that it will eventually lead to a response to this grace. So the Lord is speaking now to his people. He says, "Long ago, your fathers lived beyond the Euphrates River, Terah, the father of Abraham and of Nahor. They served other gods. Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river, and I led him through all the land of Canaan. And I made his offspring many. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau." Now, this happens like just really quickly, but when God made a promise to Abraham, and then it was like 25 years before he gave him Isaac. Then after Isaac, it was like another 20 years before Jacob and Esau. This was taking a long time. We're getting the like blitz version here. God says, "I gave Esau the hill country of Seir to possess, but Jacob and his children went down to Egypt." These first 4 verses are a summary of Genesis, really quickly. And what we need to notice here is that God is making a point. The patriarchs, the leaders, the founders of this great nation of people were pagan idol worshipers. They worshiped other gods, the gods of their land and their culture. But then God, in his grace, took Abram out. He pulled him out. He called to Abraham and gave him a new life. God is saying, remember my grace in calling you out of pagan idolatry, out of superstition and darkness, out of like just worshiping anything and everything in hopes that something will work. Remember, I called you out of that. And God says that to us as well. In the New Testament, letter to the Ephesians, the Apostle Paul writes this in Ephesians chapter 2. You were dead in your trespasses and your sins, in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, that's Satan, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and we were by nature children of wrath like the rest of mankind. What Paul's saying here is that we're lost, we're dead, we're unable to save ourselves. In other words, if you're a Christian here today, it's a miracle. That's a miracle. You didn't just make a solid choice. It's a miracle. God did that. Remember his grace in calling you out of your grave, your spiritual death. Then he tells the people, remember my grace in redeeming you. Verses 5 through 7. God says, I sent Moses and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt with what I did in the midst of it. And afterward, I brought you out. Then I brought your fathers out of Egypt, and you came to the sea. And the Egyptians pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea. And when they cried to the Lord, he put darkness between you and the Egyptians, and he made the sea come upon them and cover them. And your eyes saw what I did in Egypt, and you lived in the wilderness a long time. Here's a summary of Exodus, the book of Exodus. The people coming out, exiting their slavery in Egypt. And notice the language. God says, I brought you out. In Exodus chapter 19, right before he gives them the 10 commandments and the law in Exodus 20, God tells them, I brought you out. And he uses this beautiful imagery. He says, I brought you on eagle's wings. In other words, I snatched you out of your slavery in Egypt, out of your bondage. You could do nothing to rescue yourself. I swooped in, I pulled you out, I brought you to myself, and then I kept you alive in the wilderness. Again, in the New Testament, we see more imagery of how God has done this for us. I'll read you a couple of verses. Ephesians 1:7 says, in him we have redemption through his blood. This is in Jesus. We have redemption. He's redeemed us through his blood, the forgiveness of our trespasses, according to the riches of his grace. Galatians 3:13. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. This idea of redemption, being redeemed, it's actually rich with imagery. I once heard a story about a missionary who was trying to explain this concept of redemption and what God has done for us. And he was ministering to a tribe in Africa, and they were struggling with redeem and redemption. And then one of the African Christians spoke up and said, tell them he took our necks out. What? What does that mean? He took our necks out. But he did, and all of a sudden the native people understood this imagery. Because captured slaves used to be marched through this particular region en route to slave ships on the coast. And these captured slaves wore iron collars around their necks with a chain attached on the front and on the back that would connect them to the person in front of them and behind them. And if someone were to see this procession go by and they wanted to and had the means to do so, they could stop the procession. They could go to the master and pay the slave price, and the master would go and unlock the collar around their neck and take the man's neck out of their chains and set him free. Christ took our necks out. God freed Israel from slavery to the Egyptians, and then through Jesus, he's freed us from slavery to sin. And only God could do that. God says, remember my grace in redeeming you and taking your necks out. Then God says, remember my grace in protecting you. Verse 8. Then I brought you to the land of the Amorites, who lived on the other side of the Jordan. So that's the east side of the Jordan River. They fought with you, and I gave them into your hand, and you took possession of their land, and I destroyed them before you. Then Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, arose and fought against Israel, and he sent and invited Balaam, the son of Beor, to curse you, but I wouldn't listen to Balaam. Instead, he blessed you, so I delivered you out of his hand. This is a summary of the book of Numbers, with a nod to one of my favorite Sunday school stories of all time, Balaam's ass. Why would a child love that story? I don't know. I guess we'll never know. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I don't have time to get into it, but you should just Google Balaam's ass. Bible, right after that. And it should take you right there. The point is, God had been protecting his people, even from false prophets. He had been protecting them all along, even before they made it to Canaan. This generation had survived the wilderness when the older generation died off. God was protecting them. Look back on your life. Think about how God has protected you. He probably hasn't protected you from everything. He's probably allowed you to feel some things and go through some things, some hard things, some difficult and challenging and maybe even painful things. But I would imagine that if you're like me, we don't even realize just how much God has protected us from because we belong to him. Think about your kids. Think about how often your kids have no idea all that you go through and how you protect them and spare them from pain, heartache, or danger. God's reminding his people of his protection. Remember my grace in protecting you. And then in verses 11 through 13, he says, remember my grace in blessing you. You went over the Jordan River and you came to Jericho. And the leaders of Jericho fought against you. And also the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And I gave them into your hand. And I sent the hornet before you, which drove them out before you. The two kings of the Amorites. It was not by the sword or by your bow. I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and cities that you had not built, and you dwell in them. You eat the fruit of vineyards and olive orchards that you did not plant. This is a summary of the conquest in Joshua. God saying, I gave all of your enemies into your hands. I gave you those victories. I gave you cities full of homes that you didn't have to build. And now you are enjoying the produce of vineyards and orchards you didn't have to plant. And the New Testament speaks to us about all that God has given us in Ephesians 2. Again, after we were dead in our transgressions, verse 4, but God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even while we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you've been saved. Then he raised us up with him and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, so that in the coming ages he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace and kindness toward us in Christ Jesus. It's hard to put into words or describe these spiritual blessings that we receive by belonging to him. But I'm thinking about the peace that I've seen this week in my friend who's been rejected and abandoned, whose life's fallen apart. I'm thinking about the humility that I was given recently to go and own my sinful actions. And how good that felt, though it was hard. I'm thinking about the friendships that I enjoy that are full of the Spirit, with just conversations that are so rich and call me to more of life with Jesus. God is saying to his people and to us, remember my grace in blessing you. Remember my grace in calling you out of darkness and out of that idolatry, out of that confusion and superstition. Remember my grace in redeeming you and taking your necks out of the collars and the chains and freeing you from your sin. Remember my grace in protecting you and watching over you and keeping you like a good shepherd. Remember my grace in blessing you. Which all leads up to the question, how then will they and will we respond to this grace? Verse 14. Now Joshua is speaking. In light of all that he has just said, that God said to his people, now therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. This word serve is really important. Just in this chapter alone, the Hebrew root for this word is used 18 different times. Sometimes in other places in the Bible, it's translated as worship because those ideas are very intertwined. Worship and serve. Joshua says, in light of all that God has done, in light of his grace, serve him, worship him honestly and wholeheartedly. Then he says, put away the gods that your fathers served before the river and in Egypt and serve the Lord. Think about this for a second. You mean they're still carrying around those pagan gods? He says, put them away. Those gods of your fathers. The ones that God called Abraham away from. You're still following them? You're still carrying those things around? Are they got these little idols? Are they stuffed in their backpacks or in their tents? Are they setting them up everywhere they go? What are they thinking? Are they making offerings to these old gods? Are they hedging their bets? Are they looking to them just in case God doesn't show up the next time? What are they doing after all of this? I was amazed by this when I read this, that they would still be turning to other gods. But then I kept reading, and what really amazed me even more was that God knew all of this and still did all those great things for them. Think about that. This is your God. They've been carrying around these gods, sort of in their back pockets, just in case. God's known it all along, and he's done all of these things. This is your God. Remember his grace. Then Joshua says, if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, which is a really strong way to say, I think, if you're not going to serve the Lord, you're not going to worship him, then choose this day whom you will serve. Whether the gods of your fathers that they served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now dwell. Joshua says, you got a choice to make because you're going to serve somebody. Right? That's an old Bob Dylan song. For some of you old heads in the room, you might know, you got to serve somebody. You can look to the gods of your fathers, maybe even the gods of your captors in Egypt, all that you kind of lived in and were just sort of indoctrinated by, all those broken beliefs of your past, all those bad habits that have just been handed down from generation to generation to generation. You can serve them. Or you could serve the new gods. You're in a new culture. You got a new land, and they've got all kinds of beliefs and practices and truths. You could serve them. But you're going to have to choose. You got to serve somebody. And you will end up serving somebody. And then Joshua declares what's been stamped on every coffee mug and tapestry and t-shirt. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Maybe not everybody was all in on God. Joshua was. They said, hey, you got a choice to make. Well, while you're thinking about it, let me tell you about my Lord, right? Like the one we just heard about, the one who just spoke to us, reminding us of all the things he's done. My God is a walk through the valley with me kind of God. Like my God is a God who makes a way when there doesn't seem to be a way. My God is a God who breaks chains of habits and addictions and slavery to sin. My God's a promise keeper. He's a sin forgiver. He's a comfort zone challenger. He's not going to be controlled. He's not going to be bought or traded or sold. He's not going to be a political figure. He's not going to be a dictator. He's going to be a gracious, loving Father, and He is God and there is no other. As for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And this house, this family here at Two Rivers Church, are we going to serve the Lord? Because this church is God's plan to reach the world all around us. This church, imperfect as it is, filled with people who are broken as we are, is God's plan to reach the world as we are being transformed by Jesus. He's redeeming our brokenness. He's pulling our necks out of the chains. He's changing our appetites and the things that we run to thinking they're going to satisfy us. He's opening our eyes so we see the beauty of the gospel and the things of this world grow strangely dim. He's opening up our ears so that we can more fully and clearly hear His voice, and He's speaking to us and prying open our hands, as Maggie said a minute ago, so that we lose that kung fu grip on those things that we think will satisfy us, or perhaps the control that we think we have to have in our lives. He's doing this so that we would find freedom in trusting Him. So that we would see that all we've been given is from Him, and it's to share. And therefore this church has been, will continue to be, I pray, a place where we don't hide our sin, where we confidently invite our friends, where we can practice our gifts and not feel the pressure to perform, where it's safe to stumble, where we're challenged to grow, where we mature and we get stronger and we multiply, so that those who need faith will see our faith, so that those without hope can have our hope, so that those who need to feel loved will feel our love as we love wholehearted with the love of Jesus Christ. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Are you with me? That was half-hearted. That's okay. You know, Joshua asked the people that question, and they said, "Yes, we're with you. We will serve the Lord." And then Joshua said to them in verse 19, "You will not serve the Lord. You are not able to serve the Lord." Love that. What a great crescendo there, you know. I know you're all fired up. I really think Joshua's being hyperbolic here. I know you're all fired up, but I'm going to challenge you now. You've got the land. You're going to leave this place, just like you're going to get up and you're going to get out of here in just a few minutes, and you're going to go back into the world, and everything's going to be clamoring for your attention and your affection, and there's going to be so many things at your fingertips and at your disposal, and you're going to be so tempted by so many things. Will you serve the Lord? That's what Joshua's saying here. I know you're fired up right now, but will you? And he's right. They're not able to serve God. At least not perfectly the way He commands. And none of us can. Which is why God sent His Son Jesus. To perfectly serve God. To perfectly obey God's commands. And then to be sacrificed for it. To do all of that on our behalf so that we could serve Him with a wholeheartedness that's impossible on our own. So that we could stumble and fall and then get back up and grow stronger. So it could be part of His plan, rescue and redemption, and find greater purpose in that than anything this culture and all its little gods could offer us. So what? God says, remember my grace in calling you. Remember my grace in redeeming you, rescuing you. Remember my grace in protecting you, caring for you. Remember my grace in blessing you. How will we respond? You know, I don't think we carry around little idols in our backpacks, set them up and pray to them in hopes that something good will happen. But I do think we sometimes carry around things in our pockets that we run to and hope will give us things. But what's even deeper than all the stuff we could talk about are some idols of our hearts that we talk a lot about in our life groups. These idols are comfort and approval and power and control. These are the things that are driving a lot of our broken habits, thought patterns, sinful behavior. It's our longing for these things. And we will make sacrifices to try to have these things. So for just a moment, because I think it would be good to take a moment here. I think it would be good for you to take a moment today and this week to just reflect and allow the Lord to speak and show us what it might look like in our lives in this coming season to serve these idols so that we can see it coming. Would you bow your head with me? Father, we have just a moment. I want to invite your Spirit to open our eyes. And I want to just ask a few questions, and I pray that you would speak to us. Pray that you would show us what it looks like to serve the little g God of comfort in this season. Would you reveal to us some of the ways we serve this idol? Maybe it's not signing up for a life group or plugging into community because we've got a lot going on. And it'll be uncomfortable. It might be that we're not going to serve in this really busy season on a team because we like our slow Sunday mornings. It might be we just turn on a screen in the evening because it's more comfortable than engaging with someone around us. Avoiding a hard conversation because it will be uncomfortable. God, would you open our eyes and show us what it looks like to serve the God of approval in this season? Maybe it's saying yes because we want someone to like us. Maybe it's failing to have a hard conversation because we don't want to lose the approval of someone. Maybe it's only confessing our sins to a degree or trying to put a bow around them because we don't want to lose people's approval. We want to look good in their eyes. us that we're rarely honest about what's really going on because we want people to think we can keep it all together. God, would you open our eyes and show us what it looks like to serve the God of control in this season? It might be micromanaging the people around us, trying to control the outcomes. Living in fear of our children getting hurt, trying to control everything. Maybe spending, overspending in a stressful season because it gives us some sense of control over our lives. Lord, would you open our eyes to see what it looks like to serve the God of power in this season. Always chasing more wins, more money, more achievement, because they make us feel powerful and important. Maybe it's lording authority over people in our lives. Maybe it's overcommitting to things that we may not ought to commit to, but we want that feeling of powerful when we can do it all. Lord, would you open our eyes to see what it would look like to turn away from, put away these idols of our hearts and turn to you and serve you wholeheartedly. Would you speak to us about that? Because that's who we want to be. We want to be people that aren't holding back. We just worship abandoned, wholeheartedly. We just give generously without control or fear. We are generous with our words and cheering one another on and like stepping into the hard and knowing you'll be there with us in it. Wholehearted devotion, allegiance, affection for you. Would you open our eyes to see what that looks like in this season? And finally, God, before we walk out of here, as we walk up to this table and we take this meal, I pray that you would use it to remind us of your grace and give us the boldness, the strength, the courage to trust you wholeheartedly. I pray that in Jesus' name. Amen.